Merry Christmas. We hope that you are having an enjoyable season and celebrating the Lord's birth. And really what we want to do today is we want to have a quick conversation about what it means to have conversations with your kids or family about giving and how you can incorporate that into this season.
Welcome to the Second Half Stewardship podcast. We believe that God owns it all, and our response as Christians is to live generous lives. I'm Spencer Hall, a certified financial planner.
And I am Austin McLaughlin. As former full-time missionaries in the United States and overseas, Spencer and I approach managing our personal finances through the lens of biblical stewardship.
Journey with us as we explore how to be generous stewards of our money, time, relationships, gifts, and experiences. So, Austin, money conversations with kids. First, I'm a little upset that you drug me in on Christmas Day to be able to get this content out to everyone on the 26th, but here we are. So let's talk about how to have conversations with kids about money broadly, but also in giving, because each of us have experimented with this. Some we have some wisdom that we'll incorporate from books that we've read as well. And so we'll go ahead and dive in.
Yeah. And one thing we want to say is that even if you don't have kids, this can be conversations that you can have with just about anybody. We recognize that talking about money can be really challenging, but it's really important to open ourselves up to have these conversations. So if you don't have kids, don't just click off the video and say, this isn't for me.
Right.
So really what we want to start off with is that conversations about money are lifelong, because discipleship, the process of becoming more like Jesus, is a lifelong process. And prayerfully, we're guiding others in that journey towards looking more like Jesus every day. And obviously for parents, this means that our relationship with our kids, how we're walking with our kids towards Jesus, it's going to be really important. And so they need to see us, they need to experience how we use our money, how we are charitable, how we give our time and our resources as well. And so really conversations about money are not just an isolated event, they're part of the entirety of the discipleship process. And the conversations, they vary by degree, not kind. This is a term stolen from CrossFit, but when you think about it, your 30-year-old son versus your 3-year-old grandson, you're going to still have to talk to them about money.
Right.
But I'm not going to have the same conversation with my grandkids prayerfully that I'm having with my kids now as they're elementary age, or when they become adults. The conversation is going to shift and change because their needs change, because their situation of life changes. But I can't avoid the conversation about money.
Well, and it's best not to start with everything up front. You don't want to have your first conversation in depth that's at a heart level with a 30-year-old. You want to have it all along the way in a way that is specific to the capacities of that child. So because it is a lifelong process, we've got a lot to impart, and kids need to see us failing some too, and having elements that we need to grapple with, because that is it's a key area of stewardship, and there's nothing that will tell you exactly what you need to do in every moment.
So walk us through maybe, why is this so difficult? Why are money conversations, especially with our kids and our family members, why is that so hard?
Well, money's taboo in our culture, and we see this in so many different ways, but raising a conversation even about what we make in terms of income, or what we're spending on a week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis is taboo. Now, we can kind of get a glimpse of what other people maybe spend by the car that they drive, the vacation that they take, different elements that kind of signal to us. But sometimes those are done shamelessly to try to get our attention, to make us think something that's actually not true about somebody's income. So we have to be careful about how we take that in, but people don't usually share with other people. It's a taboo subject. So that's one of the barriers that we face. And it's not just with friends or with people that we come in contact with, but it can be family as well. Because as we share conversations with our kids, they're going to then have some perceptions that they have with their friends, and sometimes there can even be identity issues that are linked there, that they say, well, I don't get to have that vacation, or I don't have those clothes, am I just as good as that person? And there can be some subtle signaling from some of those wealthier kids. We've grown up with that at times and seen that, but they can shamelessly signal, in that direction as well, because sometimes parents are not able to give as much time, so they give that money and then they allow their kids to kind of use that in ways that are not really all that helpful. So it can be a difficult dynamic to unpack.
Right. Well, and I think too, even back on my economics classes in high school, I wish that I would have taken those and really ran with them. But the reality is just teaching these principles of compound interest or rigid categories of where your funds need to go, sometimes it just doesn't click. And really there needs to be both a mental piece to this, but also a tangible piece where we're giving people the opportunity to succeed or fail. I remember every year the catalogs come in the mail about what different companies are offering for the holidays. And I remember one year, a couple years ago, a catalog from one of these big box retailers came in, and I think it was like a 30-page spread. I have 3 kids. I think every single page had something or multiple things circled on it.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, man, why do my kids love stuff so much? But then as I filter back and I start thinking, well, it's easy to really bemoan those companies when the reality is sometimes I find myself flipping around on my phone and looking for stuff to buy that I don't need. And so why do I bemoan those companies or bemoan my children if my pattern is the same?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't spend the money, maybe I don't incessantly buy stuff, but if I'm constantly looking or skimming for those things to buy, then why would I be surprised that my children would do the same when a catalog comes with all the shiny toys?
Well, and we gave one of our kids an assignment to give us a couple of ideas of what this child wanted for Christmas. So the child found an old Lego catalog, and this was like 3 years old, but took 20 different Lego sets and wrote them down meticulously with the numbers and everything. And we had to tell the child, sorry, but this is an old and dated catalog. None of this is even available. But it struck us that you could pick 20 different ones here. We have that desire to have more and more and more if we don't have a clear understanding of how much is enough, and if we don't really help our kids grapple with that as well, because there are trade-offs. The more that we take, there's also less to be able to give, less to be able to, build God's kingdom in some different ways.
Yeah. So we're going to look just briefly at Acts 20, 32 to 38. And really what we're wanting to come back to is there's, Paul, I believe, is talking here, and he ends this phrase, or ends this passage, or it's really towards the back end. And he's citing Jesus' words that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And it kind of comes back to what you're talking about, is the more that I take, the less I have for other things. So if I'm constantly in this mindset of consumption and forgetting the conversations that we had with Michael the last couple of weeks of, okay, am I choosing to live simply? Am I choosing to be grateful and generous with all of that God has provided? Or am I just looking to consume? And I think we need to model behaviors and practices after what Jesus said, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And so as we think about this passage in Acts, Paul is talking to the elders at the church of Ephesus, and he's acknowledging that it's the last time he's going to see them. And these are people he's spent a whole bunch of time with. He's raised them in their faith for years. They're really kindred to him. And he's encouraging them to walk in faith and be wary of false teachers who will rise up when he leaves. And we think about the world around us is constantly bombarding us with these messages of false teaching, whether it's that new car or that new toy or this holiday sale, it will give you fulfillment. These are false messages that we either internalize or just say, well, it's not impacting me. But the reality is they're bombarding us all the time. And so we really have to be proactive in the way that we're conceiving the world around us and perceiving it. Just like Paul is saying, you've got to be ready for this. It's going to come. And its focus is on eternal things and not temporal. So Spencer, you want to read off those verses for us?
It says, "And now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my necessities and to those who were with me. In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And when he had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. And there was much weeping on the part of all, They embraced Paul and kissed him, being sorrowful most of all because of the word he had spoken that they would not see his face again, and they accompanied him to the ship.
Yeah, so what are some things that you're seeing as we look at that passage, Spencer?
Well, Paul is saying, as he does in so many other places, follow me as I follow Christ. He's saying, I coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. He's shown them a model of loving them above and beyond what would be expected and serving them, providing for his own needs so that he can give to them. So I think we see that it's also a process over time. He's shown them more and more of his life. There is a level of connection there, a dearness there that brings tears, brings emotions when he leaves. So I think all of these things together show that consistent discipleship that we really want to engage with our kids on, because there's a level of emotional engagement and there's also a level of modeling the specifics to them with respect to funds.
Yeah. And as I think about this in terms of parent-child relationship, and in some ways, Paul kind of relates to the churches that he's leading in a pseudo-parent-child relationship. He's the elder statesman that comes in with the gospel and with these things that he's walked through. And he says, follow me as I follow Jesus. And in a lot of ways, it's similar with us as parents. Paul was intensely with them for a season. Parents, we have a very intense time with our kids for 18 years of life that they are with us day in and day out. And so we have this ability in this time with them to say, let's walk together towards becoming more like Jesus. See how I'm walking with the Lord. Model some of your life after mine. Prayerfully, we're walking with the Lord and showing them that. Paul lived alongside them. He taught them publicly and privately. He raised them to be ready for his absence. We as parents can teach our children. We can model for our children. But at some point, they're going to be going off into the world without us. And it's our responsibility to raise them into that faith, but then entrust them to the Lord, just like Paul does. I mean, when he leaves, he knows there's dangers facing them. And so we need to be like Paul in that way, saying, hey, there's going to be things out there that are going to try to draw your mind and your affection away from the Lord. So, and as we talked about so many times, money is a big one of those. And I think that's why Paul even brings it up here. Like, I didn't covet your gold or your silver. He knows that those things are going to be things that can easily draw us away from the Lord. And so, yeah, like you were saying, Paul weeps for them as he's departing, but he obeyed Christ's call and then he left. So let's shift over maybe just starting to think about how we can disciple our children to use money wisely. What are some of those things that you've done, Spencer, as a family?
Well, I think we come back to principles that we want to teach and then how we exhibit those. So one of those would be a principle is that God is the provider. So we talk about how God is the one that ultimately owns our firm. We see our role as stewards rather than owner of the firm. So that's an important one because I think that sets an expectation that if we lose things materially, we are acting as stewards rather than as owners. So that's a little bit different shift, but it also means that there's nothing that the kids can do materially that is going to bear our long-term wrath. So they're going to make some mistakes, but if we see God as our provider, we can't get terribly upset because it was never ours to begin with. We need to be good stewards and we need to teach, but we also need to recognize that we also make mistakes as stewards. So as God as provider, that first principle, I think, anchors everything in the right posture as we engage our kids.
Well, and I think too about even looking back at what Paul did as he was leaving, he prayed for them and he prayed with them. And I think about times with my kids where we have actively prayed together for something.
Right.
It reminds me as I'm praying, I need to trust God for this. It shows them that I am not in control, that God is in control. And then we can celebrate later on when God provides. If it's all on me, if it's all on my shoulders to be the provider, as oftentimes we talk about, like, or culture talks about, then my kids are just gonna be like, oh yeah, of course Dad provided. But it's not me that ever provides.
Right.
I am a conduit of receiving the good gifts of God. And they need to see that, hey, we're praying together, we're seeking the Lord, and then we're celebrating when the Lord does provide.
Right. Well, and I think alongside that, we have conversations about what we're doing with God's provision. So as we support different people and institutions, missionaries, the church, different groups that support and care for the homeless, the poor, all kinds of different groups of people, then we have an opportunity to not just pray for those folks before we go to bed at night, but also know that we're helping financially to support those ministries and have that conversation there as well. And there's some specific ways that we'll dive into here that we can talk about that year end as well, that we found to have some level of engagement with the kids and some level of success there too.
Yeah. So before we get there, let's maybe just do one tool that we can use to help kids figure out how to manage money. And so this can really, we need to recognize that your kids are going to learn to manage money by managing money.
Right.
And they need to learn that there is not an unlimited supply of money.
Right.
And that God does provide in times and seasons, but we need to be wise when he does provide. And so one tactic we'll talk about is just the envelope system and giving kids opportunities to succeed with money. And so when we think about the envelope system, you essentially are telling your kids, hey, there's different categories that we can use money for. And we've talked about this before. You can use money to live, give, owe debt, no taxes, or invest it and grow. And so really, if we start modeling that at a young age with our children, then we can give them opportunities to either succeed or to fail in that regard. And when they fail, it's a lifelong lesson of, I spent too much money and now I don't have it. And mom and dad may bail me out, but maybe they won't. And it's a good learning opportunity. So when you've used this with your kids, Spencer, like how have those conversations gone? How has the process gone for you guys?
Well, I think it's age specific, and we're taking some of this, and Emily and I have applied a lot of what we've seen in the book Your Kids Can Master Their Money by Ron Blue and Michael Blue from a number of years ago. But basically, we want to again give them this opportunity to succeed and fail with money and to be right alongside with them on the ride. So at the youngest age, it might be 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, there is a level of allowance that we'll provide that is a small allowance, but it doesn't extend maybe to some of the responsibilities that they'll have later. So it might be something like, $10, $12 on a month-to-month basis. But in these categories, what we then have an opportunity is to say, okay, well, what are we using to give? What are we using to live on? What are we using to grow? How are we dividing up all of these different pieces into envelopes? And so for our youngest, when he started in this a number of years ago, he didn't have this last category that we would have, which is managing money for clothes. So the older kids, they get a stipend on a month-to-month basis that they can use in concert with some of the other money that they've made over the course of the month to buy their clothes. We realize that, we're going to, of course, provide money for clothes, and we're going to spend, money for the kids' clothes. But if we can give them that decision-making process by and large, by the time they're maybe 11, 12 years old, then that gives them more spending decisions that they can learn over the course of time, which has been really, really helpful, because sometimes the kids will say, oh, I really would like to get that sweatshirt or that pair of shoes. And they will not get that pair of shoes or sweatshirt. And they'll say, the next day, that was a great decision. I didn't really need it. Then sometimes though, they'll get a week or two down the road and they'll say, why didn't I do that? I should have done that. I needed a sweatshirt. That was a good sweatshirt. Or I needed a pair of shoes. Exactly. So there's this learning cycle, I think, that the kids have, the more decisions that they can make, because we really don't want to, if we're thinking about equipping them over the course of their lifetime, we don't want to get to the time that they're 18 and have paid everything for them, have had, no decisions on their part, and then hand them a book that says something about budgeting. That's not what we want to see over time.
Yeah.
So how about for you guys? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'd say we're still in the early processes of this. We've tried just giving your kids an allowance, but oftentimes we have younger kids than you, and sometimes they walk through a store and they see the candy
Right.
And all of the money that went for allowance just went in one hand and straight to the candy.
Right.
And so really we're trying to figure this out as well as parents and saying, okay, that didn't work.
Right.
And so I don't want to just give a blanket amount of money to the kids, but I think having those conversations is a place where my wife and I are really starting to wrestle with, okay, what are the conversations we want to have? What are the principles that we want to inhabit, and how do we invite them into that process with us?
Yeah, and so we, as we get to specifics, this is not going to be perfect for everybody or maybe anybody, but for our older kids, what we started off with, we said, well, let's do $50 on a month-to-month basis. And the way that we broke it out is we said, okay, well, 1/10 of that as kind of training wheels needs to go towards giving. So that's a tithe. 1/10 of that needs to go towards savings for the future. So that is the grow category. We had $5 that we expected them to set aside in concert with maybe other money that they would make to be able to give gifts, give birthday gifts or Christmas gifts or whatever it might be for other members of the family or for their friends. And so that was another $5 on a month-to-month basis. We figured that they would want to use some money, to have for living, just, pocket money. So that was going to be about 10% or $5 on a month-to-month basis. And so that's about $20, those categories. And then that last category was for clothes. So said, well, we don't know exactly, what we're spending on kids' clothes, but we figure maybe $30 a month a kid might be reasonable. So we tried that. And the last couple of years, we've realized the kids, they're not spending that much on clothes. Most of their clothes we get from a secondhand store. And so, but it's been a great learning process because they see, okay, if I get jeans that are at the secondhand store for $10 versus paying for them new at, another store for $60, and they're basically the same jeans, then I've just saved $50 of my spending money. So that's given them opportunities to think about how they use that for summer camps or other types of things. But it's been a great learning environment. And they add other money too. So another part of this is once we get that envelope system set up, they also see that they can make money. So both of our daughters do babysitting. Our younger son can do some chores around the home because he's not quite as old. But then our older son, he's figured out how he can make money as a soccer ref. And I'll tell you, $38 an hour reffing soccer games is a great tool to teach a child. Because now he says, well, I could go and I could mow lawns and I could make, $20 an hour, $25 an hour. I could go and I can ref soccer games for $38 an hour. I can do babysitting for $11 an hour. You see the value of time kind of. Now, you don't want to go too far here and say we only take, money, we only take jobs for the money that we make. There's still plenty of times that they volunteer their time and help other folks without any kind of pay. But it is a lifelong lesson of you have to have resources to be able to make the gifts, buy the things, and grapple with how you use those. And it's been a great laboratory for learning and growth.
So that's really great. I think being able to see what y'all have done is really helpful. And that's helpful for us as we model it to our kids and how we start thinking about, okay, these are ways that we can have these conversations. These are ways that we can engage them. Because you're a season ahead, it's really helpful to watch and see. So you mentioned earlier ways that you can talk about your kids with charitable giving. It's getting to the end of the year, and charitable giving is oftentimes a conversation that happens around Christmas. So what have you seen that's worked in terms of charitable giving?
Well, I love the idea that we can provide an incentive to help kids begin to grapple with how they give. And so one of the ways that you could do this is, as a family, you pick a certain amount of money that you are going to give to charitable causes. And as parents, you get always the veto, right? But you have a discussion about, okay, which institutions do we want to support? You have an opportunity to pray with the kids, on that and try to discern. And whether you need to make a decision as a family and you make a decision for 1 or 2 or 3 institutions, or whether you actually say, well, each child has a certain amount that we want you to make a decision on. Now, one of the things that you can do that is fun is you can give the kids some amount, whether it's $50 or $100 or $20 or some other amount. But you can say you can give this to any group or charity, but the catch is you have to make a presentation on why. And so, whether it's an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 17-year-old, they've got to come back and give the family a 3 to 5 minute presentation on why they chose the institution that they chose. And you hear them start to process, what goes on there. For bonus points, you can say, well, here's the amount. If you want to give additional funds there, we'll match the funds, or we'll go 2 for 1, or whatever it might be. But we've done that in a variety of different ways where you could say, okay, well, maybe it started at $50, but then this child was really passionate about, giving here. And so they gave another $50 or $100 or $20 or whatever it might be that then, mom and dad can match. So that, again, just gets them thinking about, how do I use funds? I could use them over here and I could buy this hat or these shoes or whatever it might be, but I can also experience the joy of being able to give over here and know that my dollars are doing something and mom and dad are going to help and match and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it can be a beautiful process of engagement and discipleship, really, because you see the kids' emotions really engage in activities like this.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I love that idea because it makes giving a family affair. And that's really a beautiful thing, because then you can incorporate what your kids are passionate about. And like you said, if my kid wants to come and give money to the homeless guy that's on the corner that is constantly doing things that we don't agree with night and day, well, maybe it's, okay, let's have a conversation about why this maybe isn't a wise decision. So having that end veto power to say, no, let's give to causes or people that are really going to, embrace that gospel mindset, embrace where is the kingdom of God moving forward, and how can we be a part of that?
Right. Or even to be able to, walk over and take the homeless guy to lunch, and have a conversation and do things, in a way that you do support, So that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, so I hope you enjoyed this episode about giving and opportunities to have conversations with your kids about money. This isn't comprehensive. There are so many different ways that you can engage your kids throughout the entirety of their lives. And just like we were saying in the beginning, this is a discipleship element. It's a discipleship element with anybody that you're in a relationship with. Have conversations about money with them. It's really important, and it'll really start shaping that relationship that you have. So we really hope that you enjoy this Christmas season, and we will see you again soon. If you found this episode valuable, share it with a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you don't miss the next episode.
This content was provided by Second Half Stewardship. We are in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you can visit our website at www.secondhalfstewardship.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents.